You are listening to the Freedom Frontier. In the early 1980s, a man named Randy Weaver began to believe that the U.S. government was becoming a little too corrupt and feared a dark future was coming. To add to his suspicion, his wife, Vicky, claimed to have reoccurring dreams that the apocalypse was coming. The Weavers began to sell all of their belongings and learned to live without the need of electricity. In 1983, the Weaver family bought 20 acres on a hillside of Ruby Creek, Idaho, and built a cabin. In 1984, Randy and his neighbor, Terry Kinnison, had a dispute over a land deal. This dispute ended in Kinnison losing a lawsuit and having to pay Weaver $3,000 and an additional $2,100 for court costs. Soon after the dispute, Kinnison had reported to the FBI that Weaver had plans of assassinating the Pope, the President, and the Governor of Idaho. In January 1985, the FBI launched an investigation into Weaver's alleged plans, and on February 12th, Randy and his wife Vicky were interviewed by the FBI, where he denied all allegations made against him. The investigation highlighted that Randy had associated with a man named Frank Kumnick, a known member of the Aryan Nations, which is a group of white supremacists and government resistors. Frank Kumnick had been a target of the FBI and ATF for being suspicious of conspiratorial behavior. And for those who don't know who the ATF is, it is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The ATF had an informant named Kenneth Faitley sent to Idaho and had befriended Kumnick. In July of 1986, Frank Kumnick introduced Kenneth Faitley, who went by the undercover name of Gus Magasono, to Weaver, eventually becoming friends with him as well. Over the next 3 years, Weaver and the ATF informant met several times. But in July of 1989, Weaver, who at the time had no criminal record, had sold the informant 2 sawed-off shotguns after inviting the informant over his house. Soon after the firearm transaction, the ATF ordered the informant to cease contact with Weaver. 3 months later, Weaver accused the informant of being a spy, and later wrote that he was warned by Rico Valentino, an FBI informant. Rico had also alerted the Aryan Nations of the ATF and FBI's intentions. In June of 1990, the ATF, in attempting to blackmail Weaver with the sawed-off shotgun charges, offered Weaver to be an informant for their investigation into the Aryan Nations group. Weaver declined the offer, and the ATF filed their charges. The ATF concluded that it would be too dangerous to arrest Weaver at his property. So in January of 1991, ATF agents acted as broke-down motorists on the side of the road. When Randy and Vicky Weaver pulled over and attempted to assist them, they were arrested. Weaver was told of his charges against him, released on bail, and told that his trial would begin on March 20th, 1991. The date that he was given was incorrect. It was supposed to be February 20th instead of March. So of course, Weaver missed his court date. After February 20th had passed, the judge issued a warrant for his arrest and declared him a fugitive of the state. On August 21st, 1992, 6 U.S. Marshals descended onto the Weaver property. Their mission? To scope out the area and plan an arrest of Weaver. The 6 U.S. Marshals were in 2 groups of 3. One team setting up cameras, and the other equipped with night vision goggles and M16s, approaching the cabin. One of the marshals tested the family's dog's reaction by casting a stone at the cabin. The family dogs began to run outside and bark at the agents. Randy's 14-year-old son Sammy and a family friend named Kevin Harris grabbed their rifles, assuming that the dog's reaction was triggered by the presence of game animals. As the dogs approached the agents, one of the marshals shot and killed one of the dogs. In an act of immediate vengeance, Sammy Weaver fired at the marshals. Sammy was then shot in the arm. Kevin Harris aimed at the marshal that hit Sammy and shot him in the chest, killing him. His name was W.F. Deegan. As both parties retreated after a firefight, one final shot was fired, killing Sammy. The next day, several hundred soldiers and agents had arrived at Ruby Ridge. The Weaver family retrieved Sammy and placed his body in a shed near the cabin. The rules of engagement had been issued to law enforcement, encouraging them to use deadly force if any adult on the property was seen with a firearm. As Randy, his wife, their 3 daughters, and Harris attempted to visit Sammy's corpse, a sniper shot and struck Randy in the arm. A second shot was fired, striking Harris. The bullet passed through his body and struck Vicky in the face, killing her. She was holding their infant daughter, and as they hit the ground, Randy's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, retrieved the baby and retreated into the cabin. After several days of negotiating, Harris surrendered on August 30th. Randy and his 3 daughters surrendered the next day. Randy eventually ended up only being charged for the court case he missed, having to pay a $10,000 fine, additionally serving 21 months in prison, as Harris was dropped of all charges. Both Randy and Harris received settlements for the incident. Now, the aftermath of Ruby Ridge is still occurring to this day. Events with traces of Ruby Ridge-like nature in the cases, which deserve videos of their own. Ruby Ridge showed us the incompetence of the US government, how the transaction between the ATF informant and Randy Weaver reeked of entrapment, giving Randy a false court date, raiding his property, slaughtering his dog, his son, and his wife. And how does media entities interpret the incident? Well, the New York Times released a mini documentary on Ruby Ridge, and within the film, they had agents of the FBI nonchalantly admit it was a mistake, and an analyst hammered home that the incident sparked a far-right belief that government may not have the people's best interests in mind. Gee, I wonder where they got that idea. To this day, the media, FBI, and the US government have been trying to divert any attention to the incident, and if it is brought up, the terms white supremacist, far-right, and illegal weapons are heavily highlighted. But why is this? Why does the government and the media target the quote-unquote far right? Well, the answer is somewhat related to the fact that the people they refer to as the far right own most of the firearms that are registered in the United States. This imminently poses a threat to their power. But what should be taken away from this incident is that this can happen to any of us, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of age or gender. The government will take your life without flinching. This isn't a left or right issue. This is the people versus the state. And if there was a score on that battle, the state is winning. Ruby Ridge is rarely talked about anymore, and for obvious reasons, but it is our job as citizens to remind ourselves that by the state's standards, our lives are only valuable when we serve and obey the state. Otherwise, comply or else. This is the Freedom Frontier, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.